steps, approach, strategies.
So yeah, knowing your way, the third key. So most important piece is that this is an n=1 path, which means it's you. It's about you and your reality. That's it. Don't let anybody else tell you what process you need to take to get there, what it should look like. Only you can know. We are all unique liquid crystal snowflakes. There's never going to be another person like you. That's it. So it's up to you to know and up to you to step on the journey there. Nobody else, right? There'll be guides, there'll be feedback, but it's really your own unique experience. What we do know about it is that there is going to be alignment within the 8 different fields of our reality. And so there are things that you can do to sort of help facilitate that alignment to guide you. So the first part we want to talk about is environmental. So the environmental field, largely related to what's outside of us. What's outside, seemingly outside of us, physically, right? The air we're breathing, the water we're drinking, the light that's shining on us, the environment that we're in our homes, right? Nature, these types of things, okay? So there are specific ways that we can kind of see when somebody's out of environmental misalignment. This example is somebody who is having a mold exposure with a circadian rhythm dysfunction. And so this is obviously an environmental stress. Okay, I think the most important thing that I like to talk about with regards to environment is light. So light is everything in our world, including us, arises from the sun and returns to the sun. And we have an expression of light that comes from the sun that has been there for about 4.6 billion years, we think. And that has been what has allowed us to do what we do. So we need light in order for our neurotransmitters to work properly. We need light for melatonin so that we can sleep. We need light for leptin so that we can fire our metabolism up and burn fats for energy. We need light so we can heal our gut. We need light so we can seal our blood-brain barrier. We need light so that we can build bones, skin cells. All this, and this is the biophysics component of health. Okay, and so I say timing on this slide because when we are exposed to certain types of light is what matters. So what we now know, looking at literature, there's thousands and thousands of published articles on the circadian rhythm and light cycle disruption and the effects that it has on the brain. So as Ashlie shared earlier, one of the biggest things that holds us back in anything we do is the ability for our brain to function. If our cognition can't function, if we can't function socially, if we can't regulate emotions, if we're plagued by neuropsychiatric disorders, if we're plagued by a sleep disorder, it's going to be really hard to do what we need to do and to show up in the world and to show up in love. So there's different types of lighting that we've created, man-made light, that are more detrimental than others. So if you see on this diagram, you see what daylight sort of looks like on the top left side. That's something that's very natural. Our body knows what to do with that. It sculpts this entire body and runs the functions flawlessly when we get more exposure to that. When we started introducing fluorescent and LED lights, we started getting worsening of metabolic disorders, which actually you can see on the right-hand side. Even with reduced sugar intake, our diabetes and obesity diagnoses are still through the roof and still climbing. Why? Well, it's not fat related because we did the low fat thing already. It's not sugar related because we're doing the low sugar thing. Is it even diet related? Well, no. Now what we're learning is that it's mostly light. And so most of us are now in our world getting LED light exposure all the time. This massive spike of blue light, which actually fires up our metabolism and releases dopamine, right? Which is great, except for the fact that now you guys know that anytime we release dopamine, we have to have a withdrawal period. So we're constantly getting hit by this light that's telling us to overstimulate. And it's void of red and infrared light, which is actually what our mitochondria need to heal and repair. So at nighttime, we start getting exposed to LED light, and our brain starts thinking it's time to wake up. And so we just never get into this state of actual repair. We never get into this state of darkness. And our metabolism suffers. Our mitochondria start misaligning in the environmental quantum field. And we start getting more fire produced. This affects the dopamine. It crashes the dopamine out. There's a lot of different fallouts from this. Leaky gut syndrome, hormonal dysregulation. You can basically, 70% of our gene expression is determined by the circadian rhythm and light. 70%. It's the biggest lever that you guys can pull, no matter what you're doing. And so some like do's of light, just quickly, is sunrise exposure. Arguably the most important thing that you can do is getting your eyeballs outside when the sun is at its lowest angle of the day. That is going to help program a lot of the circadian clocks to tell the body what to do and when to do it. Melanin is the most potent antioxidant that we've ever found in the body. Melanin is what darkens our skin when we tan. So you'll notice that when you get a tan, you'll also lose a tan with time because that melanin is being used as an antioxidant. So really helpful to actually be able to do that. And melanin, neuromelanin in the brain actually helps protect us against neurodegeneration. Blue light blocking glasses after sunset. If we are in front of LED screens, which I actually should have these on now, it's a good reminder. Orange lens glasses, really helpful to be able to protect your circadian rhythm. They need to be orange. If they're not orange, they don't block enough of the light out. Using salt lamps for lighting instead of LED or fluorescent lights. Obviously, it's less energy efficient, but it produces more red and infrared light and less of that circadian rhythm disrupting blue light. And then spending time in nature, so important. There's pink noise in nature. We get electrons from the earth when we're grounded in nature. We get light from the sun. All of that actually helps align the mitochondria in the environmental field. Some don'ts of lighting: LED and fluorescent lights at night without protection. The happy lights or the seasonal affective disorder lights are a blue light. I never recommend them because all they do is spike dopamine, which again, now there's always consequences after that dopamine spike. Ideally, keeping the TV, phone, tablet, and computer off at night. There are apps that you can download on your phone, tablet, and computer that knock the blue light out, but ideally staying away from them. And not keeping Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on all the time. So particularly at night, again, there's a lot of research on how this actually causes us to lose electrons and become electron deficient. So these are some low-hanging fruits that you guys can leverage in the environmental layer, no matter what you're doing. And this is a really great example of blue light blockers. So the first image is you see the blue spectrum without any protection, and then with the clear lenses, you see it blocks a little bit of that blue spectrum. But the far right is what you need at night. So really important that you have some sort of protection if you're being exposed to any of this lighting. Cheap dopamine, this is another thing that we kind of put into the environmental component, but this is basically dopamine that is obtained without need for effort or without need for discomfort, right? Instant gratification type stuff. Processed food, sugar, alcohol, cigarettes, Netflix, social media, news, participating in neuromarketing, which basically tells you that you don't have something and you should have it, or you're a certain way and you should feel guilty about that and you should do this instead. All that type of stuff is cheap dopamine. It's giving a dopamine hit without any effort or discomfort. Right? This really important piece of this is just disrupting the hypnotic rhythm, getting out of the rhythm of doing everything the same way all of the time, thinking about everything the same way all the time, feeling the same things. You got to get out of that rhythm to be able to get into flow. So getting that cheap dopamine out as much as you can, you don't have to get all of it out, but limit it so that you can move into other behaviors, which does tend to happen spontaneously. So questions to ponder: how's my environment bringing me closer or further from my purpose? What adjustments can I make to my environment and lifestyle that will support my path? The second part is the physical body. So this is a brain map. You can see sort of what's going on in the prefrontal lobe and the delta band here. Somebody who's burned their dopamine out. Okay. So the best sort of ways, there's lots of different ways to reset dopamine. Number one is removing the behaviors that you've been engaging in as best you can. Leveraging light and the circadian rhythm, one of the best things that you can do to start resetting that dopamine. Working with organic and natural food and timing of food. So our brain is not expecting, our gut and our brain are not expecting food at 11 p.m. at night. Right, so that's another thing that's going to push the circadian rhythm off. The gut starts thinking it's earlier in the day, which throws the clocks off. So ideally trying to kind of time your meals around the time when the sun's up, not too long after it goes down. You don't even need to change what you're eating. If you just get sunrise and you eat, and then you eat throughout the day till sunset, and then you stop eating, just that little change in itself can be huge. Look at what will happen over a 4-week, 8-week period of time. It's quite notable. Energy levels, cognition. The other thing is actually doing periods of fasting. Our bodies were meant to fast. We evolved eating, hunting, feasting, and fasting. There'd be periods of time where we wouldn't eat. And that was the time when the body could trigger a process called autophagy, and it could clean itself up. It could clean up the dead cells and the damaged cells. We don't do that much because we have all the food, especially in Canada and the States, we have all the food we could ever imagine all the time, right? There is no need for fasting, right? But our body needs it. We have a built-in mechanism that can self-clean better than anything that you could ever do in the clinic. So periods, I generally tell people when you're like beginners, you can do typically 1 to 3 days of fasting, provided that you're, in good health, without any side effects. It actually can help clean things up. The same goes for ketosis. So going into lower carb states for short periods of time, not long periods of time, and not carnivore diets. High protein diets actually pull you out of ketosis. But bringing your carbs down, including vegetables, including things like, nuts and meats and that sort of thing. But purposefully getting your carbs down to force your body to burn fat. This has another mechanism in which it cleans out the mitochondrial membranes that are aligning us in the quantum field. It cleans out the heavy hydrogen isotopes that build up in there from energy production. So again, most of us, we haven't done this because carbs are typically easy, and we've gone into this balanced diet, and we do the same diet all of the time because everything's always available all the time. Right? So actually going into intentional states of fasting and ketosis can be profoundly effective for physical body optimization. Cold exposure is another thing to leverage because of the discomfort that cold exposure creates, like a cold shower or a cold bath. It actually causes us, we'll release dopamine, but we don't have the same withdrawal or refractory period. So this is a very interesting process. It's like the discomfort is the ante so that we don't have to go into the negatives afterwards. So really effective technique to bring the dopamine baselines back up. Movement, exercise, obviously really, really helpful. So many different ways to do that. It totally depends on your body type, metabolic rate, where you're at in your process, on what works well. But general movement, even if it's just a walk, even if it's 5 minutes of moderate intensity interval training, every second day, this goes a really long ways. Less is more than we think. We've been told we got to go to the gym for an hour and a half, 4 times a week, or we're not doing enough. That's not true. You look at the literature, it's not true at all. Photobiomodulation uses infrared and red light to actually reduce inflammation and help recover the oxidative stress caused by excessive dopamine states. I know that's something we do in our clinic. It's also something that Ashlie does in her clinic. And then neurotherapy, as Ashlie already had discussed, helping reprogram the wiring of that frontal lobe and those dopamine circuits. We can probably skip past this, but it's good to keep in the recording. There are optimal times for different things, eating, sleeping, where our optimal state of training is, something you guys can take a look at. And then this is just an example of ketosis. So when we fast or we work out or we do ketosis, we create something called acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is basically ACAC and BHB. Ashlie, if you just click, it'll highlight it for everybody. So these acids actually play a role in building new brain pathways. They help create more mitochondria to make more energy. They make ATP, and they actually help us rebuild our cells. So this kind of, for anybody who's a biochem nerd, really interesting processes that happen from these states. And then the last piece for the physical side is traumatic brain injuries, concussions, whiplash injuries, subconcussive injuries. This is something that I see missed so often, where we get a brain injury and we go to the doctor and they go, "Oh, you're good. You're gonna recover just fine." And we go, "Okay," and we go on about our day. The reality is, for a lot of people, that concussion and the network disturbances that it caused does not figure itself out. So at first we can seem okay, and then a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, all of a sudden our brain is really struggling. And this is the low-grade loss of energy that happens when our brain cannot communicate effectively. And what you can see here are all the blue lines in the delta and the theta. These networks have been extremely destabilized by a head injury. And so if this is the case, there's not a lot that you can do cognitively and consciously to try to get yourself back. You have to train the brain to get communicating properly again, which is where neurotherapy and neurofeedback is phenomenal. And we're now seeing things like plant medicine also being effective for that. But that really important if you have a history of whiplash or subconcussive injuries, even if you weren't diagnosed with a concussion. This map that we have up here is actually somebody who wasn't diagnosed with a concussion, they just had a whiplash injury, right? So they're like, "Oh, I didn't hit my head." But the whiplash actually bounces the brain in the skull, right? So you didn't hit your head, but yet you had a head injury and it disturbed networks, which is actually causing a lot of problems for the physical vessel for you to be able to do what you need to do in the world. So some questions to ponder on. Does how I take care of my body get me closer to or further away from my purpose? This is something you can ask yourself about everything that you do. What can I do to optimize my brain-body wellness to set me up for success? How can I use my own health journey to guide my growth and purpose, and maybe even others? How can I move forward toward my purpose in spite of my ailments? This is really important with what Ashlie said earlier, is the if-then statements, right? If I only had more energy, then I'd be able to, right? And sometimes when we're aligned, and I know this for myself, when I'm aligned and I know what I need to do and I know what is trying to speak through me and what I'm supposed to create for others, it doesn't matter if I'm feeling tired or brain fogged. I'm good to go. I just move through it. I just kind of let it be a thing. If it keeps bugging me and it's telling me that I need to address something, then I do. But otherwise, it doesn't actually have to hold me back unless I let it. So that's a really powerful question. Now the bioenergetic portion, I'm going to just share one example of this, and this comes back to the heart rate rhythm, the heart rate variability. So we are producing an energetic field from our heart center. That field is impacting the brain. It's impacting all of the organ systems. It's impacting our gene expression. Okay. There's different states that our heart rate variability can go in. We can go into fight or flight state. We can go into rest and digest state. And we can go into something called faint or freeze state, which is part of what we call polyvagal theory. So when I overload the fight or flight state for too long, I go into dorsal vagal. Some people might call it adrenal fatigue. Essentially, the nervous system crashes. It runs out of energy. Okay. The other thing with heart rate variability dynamics is they are malleable. They're changeable. So I can actually learn how to regulate myself into a coherent state. And there's biofeedback devices and heart rate variability devices that are pretty great for this. The other thing is that my heart rate variability influences others' heart rate variability, and it's also influenced by others' heart rate variability. And this impacts my ability to emotionally regulate. So if we go to the next slide, one more. Here we go. So this is an example of co-regulation. So this is actually a couple who's sleeping beside each other. And you can see that their waves are actually lining up into a coherence, right? And so this is happening on the unconscious level. Some of us are aware of it. Mostly it's happening automatically. So as soon as we are in the presence of somebody else, our heart rate variability will start adapting. Now, if we have a really strong, grounded, regulated heart rate variability, we can help dampen all of the noise around us. This is what we call holding space. I can create regulated space for everybody who's around me. I may feel people, but it doesn't matter because I'm able to regulate my way through it, which actually helps them regulate more. We call it co-regulation. Okay. There's also a concept, if you go to the next slide, called co-dysregulation, where we can actually become dysregulated if we can't keep that strength. And this has happened to me before, holding space for certain individuals where I can't maintain a regulated enough space for me to stay regulated. So I get pulled into dysregulation, right? And this is a concept and a piece that's important for all of you guys on your journey, is that there are going to be people that aren't aligned in your journey. And they may be people that are your family and friends, the ones who you're supposed to be aligned with, right? And it's hard, but there is a choice at times where we have to choose what we care about more. Whether we care about our own peace, love, and joy, which is the truth of who we are, and singing that into the world, or whether we care more about staying attached in a relationship that's not serving us. So this is an example. If you look on the left, this is a young man. His mom's heart rate variability, this is his heart rate variability on the bottom left when his mom is beside him in the room. It's chaotic. It is all over the place. And then on the right side is his dad in the room with him. And you can see the difference, how regulated he is, right? And then the top one is actually him without any parents around. You see how it's sort of a blend of mom and dad, right? So there are people that dysregulate us. And, you know, there's sometimes kind of something we have to feel into is that something that I just need to sort of feel through and learn to kind of pull some lessons out of? Or is it something that's not aligned? And if it's not aligned, it will never be aligned. There's no way to make a relationship align in the intuitive field if it's not meant to. And I think, you know, for me, I've gone through this many times in my life, and it's been a hard thing for me of letting go of relationships, feeling guilty, feeling like I'm a bad person, feeling like I didn't try hard enough. And I've learned time and time again that sometimes that's just the way it is. And letting go of those friends and family has brought me to a place of more peace, love, gratitude, joy, which has actually allowed me to sing more of that out into the world for others as well. So it's ultimately been, overall, it's only beneficial. But to the ego and to the mind, it's sometimes hard to let go, but just know that it's okay. You know, it's okay. Sometimes things just don't align. And this is part of the energetic field. So these are important questions as well. Where am I giving my energy? Where and with whom do I feel most energized? And where and with whom do I feel most drained? This question has propelled me a lot. Being really radically honest with myself, not that how I want it to be or wish it would be, but how is it really? And to be truthful, it's really draining. And so, being really honest with yourself about those situations.
So now we'll talk about the emotional side of things. And so this is going to involve more of our feelings, our emotional states. And as we really align and grow in this component, then we're better able to experience and express the full array of emotions. We're also able to deal with different circumstances and flow, and we're not getting stuck in certain states, okay? So this is an example of emotional misalignment in the brain. In this case, there's two things that can go on. We can have a dissociation from our emotions. We're completely disconnected, not aware of our emotions or suppressing them. Or we can be hijacked by our emotions, or both. Sometimes when they are on this very deep subconscious level and we're not aware of them, then they actually drive the car, right? So one of the most important things that we've found when we're trying to move forward towards our goals and our purpose is regulating our stress, okay? Because we find that when we have too much stress, then we go into a fight or flight state, which fight or flight is designed for survival. So it's going to turn the focus toward ourselves, towards survival. Our brain develops what's called a negativity bias, where it's going to be oriented towards all of the potential threats. It's going to try to predict all the things that could go wrong, which can be quite discouraging when we're trying to move forward with goals. And it suppresses our prefrontal cortex, which is where we have a lot of that executive function. So, of course, if we are not able to think clearly, then that's going to affect our forward progress. Also reduces our ability to inhibit unhealthy impulses, make good future-oriented decisions. We tend to have a little more interpersonal conflict, especially with the fight side of fight or flight. And then if we go into freeze, then we become stagnant, right? We're frozen. We can't move forward. So this has a negative impact on our overall well-being as well as our forward progress. And then we also can engage in practices to help regulate that stress and help us to really be able to maximize that potential. So things like diaphragmatic breathing, those stimulate the vagus nerve, which is going to induce more of that relaxation response. Of course, we've been mentioning about neurotherapy, biofeedback, movement, emotional expression. I really love mindfulness meditation because it allows us to notice our thoughts and feelings, but not let them get stuck. We notice it, and then we continue to let it keep moving by. Guided meditations and visualizations are also really good for this. And another favorite of mine is visualizing ourselves embodying that desired state. So this desire, this dream that we have for ourselves, if we actually take time to visualize that, just close your eyes, try to incorporate as much sensory stimuli as you can. What do you look like? Who's around you? What do you see? What do you feel? Then that actually activates 95% of the same brain pathways as if you were truly experiencing that. So it's almost like it prepares your brain for that state because it's going to strengthen those brain patterns that help embody that state. Corey, did you want to mention about the map of consciousness?
Sure. Yeah, when I was talking earlier about the different energetic logs, and this is part of the embodiment process and part of the this heart center, this energetic heart center. And so this is a map created by a psychiatrist named Dr. David Hawkins. It's excellent. But he talks about how we sort of, the way our reality looks when we're embodying different states for long periods of time. And it gets a bit complex, but what I want to kind of share is that there are lower energetic logs that are based in survival and that are the furthest from the truth of who we really are. That are fear, anger, guilt, shame, pride, desire, right? This is more of an ego-driven paradigm. So it's where ego is overshadowing heart and the focus becomes on me. This is a high entropy state, which means that you're getting a lot of energy loss. And so the differential between the love that we are and things like guilt and shame is massive. And it's because, again, we're aligning with a lie. We're aligning with a lie in the quantum field. Now, the difference between the ability to be able to embody higher energetic logs and let go of the lower energetic logs is the ability to fully feel them. So if I have anger, I lose the story behind the anger and I have a willingness to fully feel that state and then let it go. As soon as I start making it about who I am, this anger is telling me something about who I am and I must do something about it, I consolidate it. And so we can get really stuck in these levels. And if you look and read his book, he talks about how people that are at the level of love and higher, most of the time, right? You're not always going to be there. There's going to be things that creep in. But people that are at love and higher most of the time, the level of of disease, the level of poverty is almost non-existent. So the whole goal is getting to these states of who we already were in the first place. But as you do that, there's going to be almost like firewalls. There's going to be things that hold you back. The ego actually gets off on these emotional states, right? So shame and guilt, for instance, is the secret pleasure ego gets from negativity. And guess what? A lot of times in my life, when I've been like, oh, I'm the worst, what happens? People around me go, no, you're not. You're good, right? I'm getting attention. And you start watching this unfold where the ego is looking for attention in any way that it can get it. But sometimes what happens is to your dismay because it starts embodying these states that aren't serving. They're actually self-harming, right? Grief is all about clinging to the past, right? I don't want to talk about the present day life. I want to cling to the past, right? Sometimes it's just that you have to grieve, and that's great. Fully feel that grief and let it happen. But there's a point where ego starts wanting to get off on it, right? Desire, gaining control and getting approval, right? Seeking a false sense of security. Anger, feeling bigger and stronger and more powerful than I really am, right? I don't want to appear weak, right? And ego can get off on that, right? Pride, different than self-esteem. Self-esteem's earned. Pride is a projection. Gets you status, gets you noted, helps you feel bigger, superior, right? Sense of worth attached to ego, typically, right? And so it's watching these emotional states where these are all states that we're going to experience, but the willingness to feel them and the alchemy to recognize when you're letting ego start getting addicted to it. And that's the piece where we can actually start. It's not about forcing yourself into states of love. It's about letting go of all of the lies that pull you out of that in the first place. All the agitation and the noise and all these other things of the ego is just pulling you out of your truth, which is love. So love is actually the osmosis. It's the natural state. It's the ego that pulls us out of that, right? And so the ability to be able to recognize when ego's getting involved and just dropping the attention to it, because remember, it's looking for attention. And attention is food. It's like a parasite or candida. When we feed it, it grows. It proliferates. When we remove the food, it dies. And so for ego, the food is attention. Am I talking about that one too? No, okay, we're good. All right. Okay. Back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think that is a nice model of looking at like what state are we embodying the majority of the time. It's not that any of those emotions are bad, right? I personally believe that it's important to be able to float through the full array of emotions. But if we do find ourselves really getting stuck in these lower energetic states, then that's actually going to not allow us to have the energy we need to move forward. So we can look at where are we getting stuck, why are we getting stuck, and how do we release that? And then, like Corey said, we just naturally then evolve towards these higher states that really are our true self. The other thing that we tend to see a lot is we have basic needs, and we tend to try to meet these needs by either approaching the pleasure or things that are, perceived to be helping us, or we're avoiding pain, we're avoiding things that are threatening, right? So after trauma, we find that there's a region of our brain called the insula that becomes biased, and it becomes biased towards that avoidance of pain, and it tends to then numb out to the things that are more like pleasurable or bring us joy, because it doesn't need to focus on it if it's just trying to save our life, right? We found that there's 3 different types of this pain avoidance that tend to get in our way of progress. The first is loss pain. So we fear that, okay, if I lose something, or if I change, then I'll lose something. So that's somewhat what Corey was talking about, in that sometimes we recognize that there's relationships that aren't in alignment with us anymore, but we have a hard time letting go of that because we grieve the loss, right? Sometimes just as we continue to grow, then we recognize, okay, this relationship starts to grow apart, and we may not actively do anything, but we start to find that we're drawn towards maybe certain people and away from others, or they're drawn away from us, and that's okay. We have to continue moving forward and aligning with our frequency, right? We may have to give up a job, a house, our car, money, and this aspect of identity that we have created for so long about who we think we are, that might have actually evolved, right? We also have hardship pain. So we think that it's going to be too hard, right? It's going to take too much effort. And so then we start to doubt, and we don't like that discomfort. We try to avoid it, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty that our brain doesn't like uncertainty. It likes to know things. And so sometimes it's more comfortable sticking with what it knows, even if it's not good for us, rather than moving forward into something that's unknown, okay? Outcome pain is the whole question of, what if it doesn't work? What if I fail, right? So we're fretting about like all the potential things that could go wrong because we're attached to the outcome as opposed to just enjoying the process and seeing what unfolds. Now, once we understand that we have these tendencies towards avoidance and approach, we can actually start using them to our advantage. So this is something that is outlined, I believe it was Daniel Amen that talked about this. It could be James Clear. I get those two confused. We've got the references at the end that give you some recommended readings, but they talk about how do we get rid of a destructive habit. We need to associate it with discomfort, and that will naturally promote avoidance because we don't like discomfort, right? So making it invisible, where it's not in front of us all the time, it would take an extra step to go get something or do something. We make it unattractive, so we try to associate it with things like disgust, for example. We make it more difficult. Again, having that extra step, increasing the friction. We make it unsatisfying, so we remove the rewards that it's been giving us. And then we can identify and limit any subconscious cues or triggers that tend to lead to that. If we're trying to help ourselves engage in a new habit, a more helpful habit, then we do the opposite. We try to associate it with as much pleasure as possible because that will naturally promote approach behaviors. So we make it obvious. We use visual cues, something on our fridge or sticky notes on our mirror. We have our tennis shoes by the door that remind us to exercise. We can stack it with other habits that we're already doing. So, I'm going to brush my teeth and then do 5 stretches. Right? We can track our habits and our goals. So we have like a spreadsheet on the wall that shows, and we get to put our little star. This works wonders with kids, but it also works with adults, right? Making it more attractive. So I love this image because when I see this image, I'm like, oh, yummy. I want more fruit. I want nuts. I want veggies because they look attractive, right? We want to make it more easy, remove the extra steps, set small goals that are achievable, and then make it more satisfying by adding a reward to it. Ideally, making it a more immediate reward since we do get used to instant gratification. But also looking at the overall picture and just the process. So, for example, you want to take a trip to Italy. Then each time you succeed with this goal that you've set, these little steps along the way, you put $20 in a jar to go towards your trip to Italy. That's an immediate reward that also results in a bigger reward down the road. We can also connect it to our values and make it identity relevant. This increases the subjective value of it. So for example, rather than saying, okay, I want to eat healthy, we say, I am a healthy eater, right? There's that teeny little shift of the verb in the noun that makes us identify with that we want to be. And then, of course, joining with others that have a similar goal, mission, purpose, then like Corey was sharing, we will start to resonate with the same frequency as them, and that's going to support our process. It's also going to just give us that extra sense of, accountability, that joy in engaging with others, and it makes us more resilient against the obstacles. And then reducing the power of pain and discomfort reduces the power that it has over us. So if we can practice relaxing into each moment and everything that's unfolding, we look for those lessons and opportunities in our setbacks, looking at our symptoms and challenges with curiosity rather than avoidance, finding acceptance in worst case scenarios. So this is an interesting one because a lot of times we're trying to avoid all the worst case scenarios, and we even try to talk ourselves out of it. No, that's not going to happen. But I like to play the game of so what? So if I'm like, oh, okay, well, if I do this, then this will happen. So what? Can I live with that? Can I be okay with that? Is there some silver lining in that? And if we can actually find some silver lining in every worst case scenario, then we're unstoppable. We can also take a look at what are truly needs versus what are actually just wants. And we can practice self-compassion and lightheartedness because we will make mistakes along the way. That's a given, right? We are imperfect beings. So really practicing this concept of I am perfectly imperfect and that's okay. That helps us to not dive into this cycle of shame and guilt, because the shame and guilt, like we saw, it puts us into lower energetic logs and we start to embody those states, which unfortunately contribute more to the behaviors we're trying to get away from. And then also recognizing the difference between states and traits. So whatever we are feeling in each given moment, that's not who we are. It is a dynamic process. And this is another beautiful proverb. The medicine is already within the pain and suffering. All you must do is look deeply and quietly, and you'll realize it's been there all along. So these are some questions to ask yourself. Again, we will send these out in a handout, but just for the sake of time, we'll continue into the mental. So when we have mental misalignment, a lot of times we are either on the overactive side, we're ruminating, overthinking, over analyzing everything, right? We're too far in mind, not enough in heart. Or we can have the flip side where we're not able to engage that cognitive process. We're not able to think clearly or problem solve, and either one of those gets in our way. So one of the pieces related to this is our mindset. One of my favorite ways of looking at this is we can see things as happening to us. That's very common, and it tends to contribute to more of this powerless victim state. As we grow, we start to see that things can be happening for us. So even the quote unquote bad things in life can actually be used to promote our growth and our learning. And then over time, we see that these can happen through us, kind of like the origin story. The experiences that we have can actually help guide us and move us to make our impact in the world. We want to focus on running toward what we're looking for as opposed to running away from things, and recognize when we get messages of what's misaligned. We also want to focus on present moment. So sometimes, as we mentioned, when we're goal-oriented, we focus all of our attention on the future, but unfortunately, we don't have any control over the future. Change can't take place in the future. It takes place now, in the present moment. So the more we stay grounded in this moment, the more we have an impact on our world and our reality. As Corey mentioned, breaking the hypnotic rhythm, that helps us break out of different habit loops, and opens up space for growth. And you are already that which the mind is looking for. So just recognizing that this isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming your true self. So in this, we need to recognize our beliefs about ourselves, our beliefs about others, beliefs about how the world works, and recognize that our beliefs about others in the world are our beliefs about ourselves on an unconscious level. So those can also be used to guide that awareness. And then we can recognize that our beliefs are going to influence our process. So placebo and nocebo. Placebo is when we believe something will work. Nocebo is when we believe it won't. And we find that both of these have a significant influence. So we want to use placebo as best we can, because the more we believe it's not going to work, then we get in our own way. Believing that you are worth it, okay? And that if we can continue practicing affirmations and some of those thought processes, then we can ingrain those in our brain, start to strengthen the neurons and the paths that are associated with more of those positive emotions and positive progress. On the flip side, we have self-limiting beliefs. So you want to become aware of those too. Okay, what are the beliefs that are getting in your way? You might be thinking that you're too old, you're too tired, you're too lazy, not smart enough, not strong enough. You think if you haven't found it yet, you never will, right? Perfectionism is another tricky one. We can be really goal-oriented, but then we think that we need to be perfect, and then we, again, get thrown into that shame and guilt. Believing there's not enough to go around, won't have what we need, we don't deserve it. All right. We also need to manage our expectations. Okay, so as Corey was talking about with the dopamine, with those expectations, that's going to create a little bit of a dopamine roller coaster. So we need to recognize that it's not going to be a quick and easy process. So if we can see it more as a lifelong journey, then we're not so attached to just that outcome. We're able to find joy and flow in the process. Also being aware that there is often a plateau of latent potential where we're like, yeah, I'm making so much progress and things are so good, and then it plateaus for a little bit. That's okay. We continue to just take one step in front of the other during that period. And at a certain point, it's going to continue to grow and break through. Letting go of that intense need and desire, and then embracing that autotelic nature of flow. So autotelic is meaning that we can embrace the process of purpose in itself. Okay, so it's intrinsically motivated, not influenced by the external reactions, the consequences, or the outcomes. And then start where you are, okay? So this doesn't have to be some big grandiose plan. Our purpose can be starting today with what you already have, who you already are. You know, when you go to the store, help put a smile on somebody else's face, right? If you go to work tomorrow, how can you really show up in your truest essence at work? How can you show up for your family today? And then setting achievable goals. So there's a concept of 1% better, that if you just adjust 1%, this is James Clear in the Atomic Habits, it's showing that, okay, we only have to adjust a tiny bit, but if we continue on that new path, if you think about it like a plane, it adjusts 1%. Where it actually ends up is going to be far different from the original trajectory. So we don't have to take these big giant changes. We just start making those little adjustments, okay? There's also something called the 2-minute rule that he talks about, where we can break down our goals into these 2-minute chunks, because it's really hard to make an excuse of not being able to do something for 2 minutes. So that reduces the friction that gets in the way. Many of you are already familiar with neurofeedback and neurostimulation if you've worked with us in our clinics, but these are two of the techniques that can be used to help rewire the brain, train it towards healthier patterns of activity. So we can reduce our limbic system's hypersensitivity and thus reduce some of that excessive stress response. We can repair the basal ganglia, which helps it boost our reward, motivation, and drive. Balance the insular cortex, which helps with that balance between pain and pleasure so that it's not just oriented towards the pain. We can improve the function of our prefrontal cortex, thus setting us up for success with some of these more executive functions that are crucial for us to be able to move forward on goals. And then it also can help balance the hormones and neurotransmitters. So things like dopamine and serotonin. So these are some questions to ask yourself about your values, your beliefs, how you want to grow. And then the intuitive state. So with intuitive misalignment, sometimes we see that we're either not tuning in with our intuition, we're completely just unaware of it, or we can get into this state that we call spiritual bypassing, where we actually disconnect from our embodied reality. And again, if we're this like spirit not connected to a body, it's really hard to take steps, right? So all of this that we're presenting on is really designed to help you be able to live this intuitive life over just an intellectual life. So when we align these different components of our consciousness, we're able to more effectively tune into our intuition, which is where we're able to tune into our truest self, our truest purpose. It allows us to be more heart-centered. Okay, we live from this deep knowing, and it may not make sense to the mind and to the ego, but our heart feels fulfilled and it knows that this is the right path. Okay, so this allows everything to feel more in flow. We don't have to force it, and it allows us to really be our truest essence, which I believe is light and love. So as Corey mentioned, there is that science of intuition where our heart is actually picking things up from the field. There's some really interesting studies that have shown that the heart detects things that are about to happen before the brain. So tuning that system allows us to tune that intuition. And some practices are, of course, stillness, because if we're in this craziness, chaotic thought field, then we can't really tune in. Meditation and prayer, breath work. So again, regulating our breath. I like to use this phrase of breathe in light and love, breathe out what no longer serves you. Fasting, as Corey mentioned, can kind of clear and tune our physical system that is like that channel for intuition. Spending time in nature. There are different plant medicines and psychedelic assisted processes that can help us tune in with our intuition. And then connecting to forces beyond just yourself, right? So tuning into God, source, universe, Pachamama, higher self, whatever feels aligned for you, tuning into that greater field. So we can look at the moments in our life that we have tuned into intuition and see what helped us to tune in those moments. We can look at different practices that help us tune, that feel aligned for us. We can find others who can maybe guide us in this process, and then aligning with things greater than ourselves.
All right, the archetypal field. So this is one that's a little bit hard to look at a baseline brain map, but there are a lot of great processes to help you sort of discover this. One thing that we do is a cognitively challenged brain map, where we actually challenge your brain in different ways. Have you give an impromptu speech, have you do body movements, have you repeat sentences, do various different tasks like that, so we can see how your brain responds to task. This was huge for me, recognizing the Jungian archetype that I embody in best flow, which actually you can see on the left is my communication pattern when I'm under task. So I tend to do this thing where I use the outside of my brain a lot. It's called the halo archetype. And it's associated with something called extroverted intuition. So one of my lead cognitive functions is extroverted intuition, which means that I actually, if you go to the next slide, I have a sort of my flow state is more exploration. And I'm able to put together pieces of different systems and different ways of doing things in ways that other people don't see. And for a long time, this is not something that was rewarded, because even my parents were like, why would you do that? Like, why would you do that? And there was this sort of like, I don't know. I don't know why I did that. Right? And so I shut that function down in myself for a really long time, and it led to a lot of fatigue and a lot of depression, actually, because the way that I showed up in the world was growth through pain and growth through exploration, right? It's not how everybody does it, but it was what was in flow for me. So learning this about myself was huge, because it actually gave me permission to actually let myself use these functions that were wanting to flow, like that. It was just what was wanting to come through naturally. It was something that I was resisting. I was putting so much energy into that. So this can be really huge, and I know this has been huge for a lot of other people that we've worked with, is really like, this is why I do this. Oh, this is actually a thing, right? So yeah, I see this a lot with people where societally, culturally, and family systems where some of our superpowers weren't rewarded, and not only that, they maybe were punished. And we have to learn to release those belief scripts so that we can actually let this flow again. So this is a little bit a part of the archetypal journey. This is another example of somebody does something similar but uses introverted intuition, called an INTJ. Very introverted way of modeling reality. So it's different. Right, it's different, and so we use these skills so that we can show up in our purpose in flow. If we start inhibiting them, we can start looping on unconscious functions or functions that we're not very good at. So, for instance, for me, memory. Memory is not a very, very high function in my stack. So when I start trying to live out of memory and how I've done things before, I start burning myself out. I need to keep showing up as if each moment's new, and updating my reality that way. So yeah, really powerful way. There's MBTI archetypes and Enneagram archetypes. To keep it simple, there's a lot of other things that you can do. I find these ones probably most grounded in science and most effective, but obviously anything that can help you sort of uncover like just that natural state of who you are, because it's going to be different than other people. And then collective, one of my favorites. So the collective consciousness. We are woven into this collective consciousness, and what I like to call the collective drama, which is really this victim, hero, villain triad. You see this everywhere. Everything. Every movie that's ever been made, every book that's ever been written for the most part, right? Our news, our politics, government, it's all about who's saving who's to blame, and who's the victims. Right? And we have to be willing to drop this loop. As soon as we come into this illusion, we're blinded and we're in ego. And we're only looking at it from one aspect. And we're either disempowering ourselves, we're perpetrating ourselves, or we're overinflating our importance and going in to save somebody. Either way, we're pulled out of our center. We're pulled out of our truth. And we're missing the point. We're missing the lesson and the wisdom that needs to come through, right? So if I'm the perpetrator and it's like, oh my God, I did so bad. Oh, I can't believe I did that, right? I'm just beating myself up. I'm not extracting the wisdom from the moment. And the victim is sitting over there going, yeah, how could you do that, right? They're not extracting the wisdom out of the moment. And so breaking this whole illusion is really important in the whole collective drama. There is no victim, there's no villain, there's no hero. That's all stuff of the mind. That's all stuff of the dualistic mind. As we've mentioned multiple times, surrounding yourself with people who are in synchrony with what you're aligning with. And there's lots of great research on how our brain waves actually sync up with people around us. And sometimes they can't sync up, and there's just a whole bunch of noise that is created. So I love this. Actually, Dr. John DeMartini has a line he says all the time. He says, the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions that you ask. I add to that and say, and the quality of the company you ask them in. Who is reflecting for you? How are they reflecting, and what angle are they reflecting from? That could be very limited, or it could be very expansive. And this bridges to the concept of mirroring. And we can really use this to our advantage as well, because sometimes there are people, and for me especially, I've looked up to a lot of people, and I don't really like to use that word looked up to, but more opened myself to be imprinted by. So, these are people that are really like aligned in their purpose, and they're really embodying what they're doing. And for me, it's been mentors in the functional medicine field or in the field of consciousness. Some people who aren't even alive, like Carl Jung, who I really like. I tune into his work, and I really truly do respect. And I want to sort of mirror some of like what is it that he was doing? How is he looking at the world? Right? I don't need to be him. I'm never going to be him. But how is he looking at the world? What were the questions that he was asking? That's really important to me, and I can use my mirror neuron network to start mirroring and sort of almost doing this like fake it till you make it thing to align myself, right? So we have examples of people within the collective archetype that we can actually align with, right? And we don't even need to be with them physically. Maybe we do, maybe we can, but even just reading their work, listening to their stories, right? Really, it can be really profound. And then some of the really interesting research on global consciousness is there's this global energetic field, and it actually has an influence on the earth. And what I like to say is it's like we are collectively creating a dream together. And the dream that we create is based on our collective alignment. So there's two ways this can go. You know, one is an example of 9/11, which is on the next slide, where the moment that 9/11 happened, and for days afterwards, there was this this is magnetic field signatures from various points on the Earth. So there was this massive shift of the magnetic field signature of Earth. Almost everybody on the planet was watching this event in one way or another and having an emotional felt experience of that event. And the effects on the magnetic field of Earth were drastic. So we take that another angle, that's, obviously a negative side. We take it to another side of the Maharishi effect, where there was a reduction of violent crime in Washington, D.C. I think it was 10,000 meditators meditated on peace and love without doing anything else. Just the energetic of that embodiment reverberated to, in some areas of D.C., a 40% reduction in violent crime over the weeks that they were doing this. It was a month-long, I believe, demonstration that happened in 1993. So incredibly powerful. So I always ask the question is like, what dream do we want to create together? And I can't do anything else for anybody else, but how can I embody that state of what I want to see on the planet? And that is all it's about. It's not about, sometimes again, it's about the doing out there, but that is emerging from the embodiment within. And that's how it works. We cannot bypass the internal embodiment. It won't work. It's not how the physics of it works. And for anybody else who's a nerd like me, this is an amazing short book on the research, the physics of collective consciousness. This was written a little while ago. It was 96, 97. But even then, what we knew. Now, it's incredible what we know about this field and the effects that it has on the Earth. So in the embodiment of purpose is always keeping this in mind, is like, how am I showing up in my purpose, right? And even if it's something as simple as, I don't know exactly what my purpose is out there, but I know that my purpose is love. That's the one thread for everybody. The purpose is love, right? So how do I be love? How do I feel love? How do I do love? How do I show up in even little things in the day? Like I sometimes like to say, how can I allow this moment to express itself even more fully? And what can I do in this very moment? Right? How am I loving? How am I speaking about it? How am I seeing it? How am I knowing it? Right? And then how are we being together in that? So there's all these different divisions of embodiment. It's not just about what we do, and it's not just about what we say. It's about all of it. And when you can bring those all together, that's when the magic is really going to happen. And again, as Ashlie said, it's a process. And enjoy it. Enjoy it all. You can't get it wrong. As soon as you have the awareness and the intention of wanting to align in love and show up in your highest purpose, it will start unfolding. Everything will start happening for you to align with that, just through that intention. We are intention creators. Be brave enough to live the life of your dreams according to your vision and purpose, instead of the expectations and opinions of others. And recognizing that although this will sometimes be labeled selfish, it's one of the most selfless things and brave things that you can do.
All right. So hopefully that has given you guys just some ideas, some questions to ponder. Obviously, there's a lot to pursuing our purpose, right? It's not just about, okay, how do I set this one little goal and the little strategies. Yes, that's a part of it, but hopefully this can help you see that there's a bigger vision here. There's really a true embodiment of who we are, discovering who we are, discovering what our heart is called to. And so it's a process. And so we wanted to give you some recommended readings and viewings that can help guide you a little bit further in your process. So these are some of the books that we really love that have helped guide us in our process. There's even some episodes that can be found on Gaia that can provide a little guidance. This page gives you some of the key references of some of these research articles that can provide you more of the science behind it. If you're looking for more of the clinical support for some of those like physiological, mental health levels, some of the neurotherapy, these are the clinics. So Neurogrove is located in Arvada, Colorado. Nirvana is in Calgary in Canada. And these are some of the things that can help in your process. And then we also have Diversum Conchae is our program that is going to be helping provide some additional further growth on the purpose side of things. So it's a little more oriented towards that deeper, more profound connection with ourselves and that growth towards purpose. Corey, did you want to mention a little more about this?
Yeah, so we are like just launching our programs for this.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh.
Typical.
We're just launching our programs for this. It will be education programs for people to align with the innate technology within themselves, as we discussed, the intuitive, mental, emotional, physical, environmental states, a lot of the science behind that, and then actually a coaching certification that will launch from that, which will be an at-home neuroscience, EEG, and heart rate variability-based program for people that are looking more, called to help others find their purpose and align with their purpose. We are also offering experiential training, which will include neurofeedback certification, fellowships for clinicians who are licensed already, how to bring in the neurotechnology to help assess this and guide people on the clinical level. And we're going to have experiential immersions as well, retreats type style. This is actually our next one's going to be in Nicaragua. All of our experiential stuff will be down in the Nicaragua area for the time being. So the next one is April 1st to 14th. This is where we are doing our plant medicine work as well, breathwork work. So this retreat will be 2 ayahuasca ceremonies in Cambo, as well as just learning about everything that we just talked about in the presentation, but actually putting it into practice in these community containers. So really, really exciting.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, all sorts of options, obviously, that we're involved in, all sorts of other resources out there for you. So we just encourage you guys to just take this as a step along the way. Don't stop here, keep moving forward, because I believe that every single person is here for a reason. Everybody has their unique purpose that's uniquely designed for who they are, what they've experienced, and their true potential. So we have a little bit more time. Again, this went far longer than we had originally planned. But we both love to talk and share all sorts of details, and hopefully you found those really useful to contribute to your own process. But we do have some more time if you guys have particular questions that you'd like to ask or anything that you would like to share.
All right.
Well, we will continue to follow up. We will be sending, like I said, some handouts that can help guide you. We'll send this recording, and we'll be in touch. So feel free to also reach out to us if you want to ask anything one-on-one. You can reach us through the clinic links that we have here. So you can access us there. My email is just drbell@neurogrove.com. So DRBELL@neurogrove.com. Corey, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, I can share my Neurogrove one too, since I have one now. It's just Corey@neurogrove.com.
Yep.
And also Corey@nirvanahealth.com. So And if you send a message out on the Diversum coaching website as well, we'll answer that. And happy to be in service in any way. Even if you just have simple questions or you want to actually have a conversation, that's what we're here for.